Hi, welcome to my channel Cloud with Girish. I am Girish, an AWS community builder and cloud tech enthusiast with expertise in delivering customer-focused and business-impacting cloud transformation programs of high complexity. In my previous video, I shared various Kiro features like vibe coding, specs-driven development, steering docs, and hooks. I also demonstrated various examples of Kiro use cases like creating a CRUD API, using Kiro to modernize my portfolio website, and using Kiro powers to create Postman collection. In this video, I will demonstrate how I use the Kiro IDE to build a real-world banking Lambda function, a credit card account status check Lambda, and how Kiro context-aware agentic approach helped me go from idea to a clean, test-ready implementation for enterprise workflow. Let's look at what did I build and why. In my prior post, I demonstrated various other use cases of Kiro, like creating APIs, UI, modernize my portfolio website, and using Kiro powers. This time, I wanted to build a serverless function that contains business logic and does not integrate with any database. The intent of this function is to have a business function that can be triggered by other events and services as needed by the workflow. With this use case in consideration, I built a credit card account status check Lambda function, as account status check is a common pattern in banking and credit card platforms. This Lambda is responsible for determining whether a card account is eligible to process transaction based on signals such as if account status is active or is closed. Does it account has a temporary freeze, or there is a fraud block, or there is a delinquency threshold or card expiration. This type of logic is typically part of authorization or decisioning workflow, and it's a great example of pure business logic that does not require DynamoDB, does not require API gateway, and can be triggered via events or schedule check. I chose this use case intentionally because it allows us to focus on decision logic and architecture and not on infrastructure plumbing. Now let's look at why use Kiro for this. So what makes this exercise interesting is not just what we are building, but how we are building it. So instead of starting with like a boilerplate SAM template or a manual handler code writing for Lambda function, or there is a trial and error refactoring, I let Kiro act as my peer engineer, guiding the implementation through prompts, reasoning about the workspace, and generating code that align with real-world banking pattern. Kiro not only generated a fully functional code, but also created an infra as code template to build and deploy the Lambda function using AWS SAM. In addition, it created the specs and design for this function as well. So let's look at a high-level architecture. Now, high-level architecture, this is a reference architecture diagram. I'm not showing the API gateway or the API key usage plan and the code build, the pipeline flow. But basically, the intent is to show this Lambda function, that we have this Lambda function that contains the business logic, and it can be invoked either by API gateway or through the events or through other processes. It's also using the SAM template to build and deploy as infra as code. And then, of course, it has event-driven invocation. So again, just a reference diagram to show that how the Lambda fit into the workflow. Let's look at the prerequisites. So familiarity with the AWS Management Console, the knowledge of Python Boto 3, basic understanding of AWS SAM, basic understanding of Lambda and maybe API gateway, basic familiarity with event-driven design and architecture, need to have Kiro installed, and then you need AWS CLI and SAM CLI installed. So let's see how Kiro and I build the Lambda. First thing first, you need to provide a prompt. So I started by providing Kiro a prompt. I explained in detail to Kiro the intent of what the Lambda function should do and why. Here is the exact prompt I used. So here you will see my prompt that I'm providing to Kiro, and I'm asking, create a Lambda function to evaluate credit card account status check. This function do not use any database or API. Create an AWS SAM template to build, validate, and deploy this function. Also create a sample JSON payload to validate the function. Do not create extensive test cases, as I am working for MVP of this function for a quick prototype. And then I'm providing a use case. I'm providing a status that, hey, should return an approved and decline or review. And then I'm saying these are the business rules that should be evaluated. Like if account is active or closed, if it's a temporary freeze, if there is a fraud block, if there is a card expiry, if there is a delinquency, and so on. So that's my prompt. Now, if you look at the Kiro response, it's actually responded to that prompt by evaluating the existing workspace. It suggested a project structure, it generating a Python-based Lambda handler, and creating a SAM template. So Kiro is basically responding as a peer saying, yeah, I'll let you create a spec for this Lambda function. Let me start by gathering requirement and creating a structure specification. And as you can see here, it actually created a requirement.md. So then it asking me to review that, and once I say, yeah, it looks good, then it's gonna go ahead and continue with the design and implementation. So in this process, what stood out immediately was that Kiro did not blindly generate code. It actually reasoned about business rule, decision path, environment-based configuration, security clarity. The entire experience felt like pair programming with a senior engineer. And I had specs of what I'm building or what Kiro is actually building. So let's look at business logic in action. So here the card account status check Lambda evaluate multiple conditions, and then this provide a clear decision saying, hey, it's approved, it declined, or in review. It also created this detailed specs in the form of requirement file. An example I'll show, and the entire experience felt like, programming with a senior engineer. So here is an example of specs in the form of requirement file. And this is all like I did not write it. Kiro generated this file. And as you can see here, it's pretty detailed. It's creating the user story, and it's basically based on my prompt and requirement. So it's outlining the requirement used by Kiro to build the business function. So having the specs is a very useful feature. Now, it also generated the AWS template, and it did that because I asked for it in my prompt. So SAM template, it allowed me to build and test and deploy the Lambda function. So this is how the SAM template looks like. It defining the Lambda handler, defining the runtime, it defining the code URI, the timeout, and so on, right? So it generated the template for me. And then it also generated the Lambda function code. I did not have to write it. Kiro agentic approach generated it, and here is my Lambda handler, and then it generated like logic around various different conditions that I wanted in my business function, like if account is closed, if it's fraud, if it's free, if it's expired, and so on. So it built all that condition, and it gave me a fully functional Lambda code, the function that I can test it, I can use it in my workflow. So now that I have the Lambda function code, I also have my SAM template to build it. Using this SAM, I can now test the Lambda function locally by passing multiple test event. And yes, the test JSON was also created by Kiro. So it did not create one, but it created multiple JSON test file to test for multiple scenario based on my business logic built into the Lambda function, checking for active account, the frozen account, the fraud, delinquency, expire card, and so on. And this is an example of basically running it locally. So I can test this function locally without even deploying to the AWS cloud. And then the final build, like once fully built, Kiro provided me final status message of the build process, confirming and summarizing what all have been built. And as you can see, it's giving me a full summary of what it has built, and it's coming directly from Kiro. The full function build, including test file generation, it was completed in about 60 minutes through peer style prompt refinement with Kiro. So in 1 hour, 60 minutes, I had a fully functional Lambda function that I can integrate in my workflow. Again, we can see it in the Kiro IDE that how it is generated, and I'll show you the Kiro IDE next. So here I am in my Kiro IDE, and what I want to show you, I have already built this function, so I'm not going to build it again. But what I do want to show you, just like you saw in the tutorial that I was talking about, here is the prompt that I provided. And I'm asking, like, creating a Lambda function and the status and the business value. And here you will see that Kiro responded to me by creating a requirement.md file. And this is how this full file looks like. So it has pretty detailed information. If you look at it, created about 112 lines of requirement, including the acceptance criteria and what the function should do and so on. And once I accepted the requirement, then it actually created a design file, and that design again talks about that how the Lambda function will be created, what are like some of the rules and all the scenario that I ask for. So, and it's also referencing the requirement that it's implementing. So that's pretty cool. And once the design looks good, then it also created an implementation plan, the task list that need to happen. And here you are seeing that these tasks are showing completed because I have already executed them. You can execute them one by one, or you can say run all tasks, and then it will start running all the tasks by queuing them up. During this task execution, it will ask your permissions on various stages, so you can provide that permission, let it run those tasks, and then eventually you will get to the point where you will have a fully functional Lambda function, just like I was showing. So this is an example of the specs file, the design, and then of course you will see the full function code that Lambda handler it has generated here, and looks pretty clean to me. Doing the proper imports, has the loggers, has the comments, using the class files and so on. And then now once it is generated, I can make as a software engineer any further changes that I need to make. And it's a ready function to be used. I did not make any change. It's actually Kiro generated a fully functional Lambda function. I simply used it. So here is an example that I'm running a SAM local invoke command, so I can run it, pass a JSON test event, which is what I'm passing here, and it should basically run the test scenario, right? So that's how it works. And I think I want to also show while it's running that it generated the JSON files for me to test. So this is Yeah, so it ran it. It's saying, hey, all status check pass, blah, 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 account ID, the sample data, and so on. So if you see here, it's not like one JSON, it's like multiple JSON it has created. So you actually can pass. It's a test data that it has created. Really, that's what it is, right? Test event JSON. So I can pass it and I can test that particular condition. So that's pretty cool. Like I wanted to show you that how it created not only the code, but the test data and test JSON file that I can use to validate this function. So this is how Kiro built the Lambda function. So in this video, I demonstrated how the Kiro IDE can be used to build a real-world credit card account status check Lambda, not as a proof of concept, but as a practical enterprise-aligned implementation. What stood out most was the quality of collaboration. Kiro reasons about intent, generated the clean code, adapted as requirement evolved, and responded like a true peer programmer. Really a great example of that generative AI is not replacing good coding, design, or testing practices, it's enhancing them. And with tools like Kiro, building business functions can feel like working alongside an experienced software engineer who understands your workspace. As agentic AI tools continue to mature, capabilities like specs-driven development, context-aware reasoning, and explainable output will become essential, especially in regulated domains like banking. I believe this is just the beginning, and these tools will continue to evolve rapidly. I'm constantly creating new content on various AWS topics, so please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the Cloud with Girish channel. Your support helps me continue producing valuable AWS tutorials and workshops. Stay tuned for more exciting content. Thank you.